He's spoken to the likes of Sky News and BBC Radio 5 Live. And now, once again, it's our turn. Trade unionist and lecturer at Unite the Union, James Martin, delves into the big issues that have affected us, particularly in 2022 so far. The so-called cost of living crisis. Why is that happening? Why are we facing unprecedented prices for petrol and diesel? Why haven't the energy costs for people in the UK for gas and electricity not been prevented from rising more than 50% in April 2022 by either the government directly or the energy industry regulator Ofgem? What influence, if any, does Vladimir Putin and the Russian invasion of Ukraine have on this escalating situation with the cost of living and the energy price increases? And how does Prime Minister Boris Johnson keep managing to get away with scandal after scandal, like the so-called Partygate, surviving, for example, this latest attempt to remove him, the confidence vote within his own Conservative Party? So to delve into all that and more, here is James Martin, joining us now from a room in the Unite the Union building in Birmingham. The interview will last so long as no one else needs to use the room, so let's see how far we get. The insights of J. Martin on our world. Society and politics. The J. Martin interview. Okay, it's 2022 and welcome back to the 107 stream for the first time in this year, even though it's June, to talk about all the things that have been happening in 2022. We're doing it in a more condensed way. We're going to pack it into less than half an hour. Actually, we managed to get an hour this afternoon. So you're back in the UK, having spent some time in France, and things might be a little bit different. So the UK particularly has seen this so-called cost of living crisis. But the main thing is we kind of know what effects it's had. We know, what prices it's put up, particularly on energy costs. It's put, those have gone up by some ridiculous percentage, like 54% or something, for the typical, monthly charge or whatever it is, quarterly, of electricity, gas, and the inflation seems to be higher as well, affecting, the food prices are going up and generally everything. But the main thing is it's coming on the back of the, as we're still coming out of the COVID pandemic. It's 2 years on from that main lockdown period. What is that the main driver of this cost of living crisis, or is it actually something else politically that's, in our world that has led to it?
Well, firstly, hello everyone. I can't believe it's been just over 6 months since we last spoke. So hello everyone. It's good to be back. I think the term cost of living crisis is a bit of a misnomer. I think what we've got is a cost of government crisis. You could also perhaps argue a cost of climate crisis too. I've travelled up and down the UK lately, and where I'm based in Cumbria, the prices of everything is skyrocketed, and I think you've got a number of factors. I mean, firstly, the first factor with the so-called cost of living crisis is greed. We see that wholesale gas prices are at a low as to when compared to 2018. The lowest prices since 2018, and yet there hasn't been any like-for-like reduction in the cost of gas. In fact, energy caps that were initially there to protect the consumer from just rabid exploitation from energy companies seems to have skyrocketed. And you mentioned France. Well, it's very interesting that the state-owned EDF, Electricité de France, has not been able to increase its prices by more than 4%. So what's the difference between the UK and France? And that story is replicated in Italy, Portugal, Spain, etc., where there's caps on the increase in energy. Well, firstly, the state energy companies are still state-owned. In the United Kingdom, you have private companies that don't answer to their customers first; they answer to their shareholders, and so more profit seems to be the message. And of course, the cap has increased twice, so 54% increase in energy costs. That's going to go up by another, I think, 50 or just shy of 50%, meaning that in 1 year, People will have witnessed doubling of their already expensive energy prices. And yes, there's been an impact due to COVID and transportation and people in the logistics. Yes, of course. There's been an impact with the supply of goods and products. But really, that's very separate to gas. What you have is a issue with petrol, where in Britain, we're not reliant on Russian oil or anything like that. But what we are is we're connected to supply and demand markets across the world, and the reduction of Russian supply has caused an increase in petrol prices, which then has the knock-on effect on the increase in costs of transporting things like food, etc. This said, production has been increased in the Middle East for oil. So could there be a reduction at some point in the future? Again, I just come back to this. It's greed. I mean, BP and the large petrol, Shell, again making record profits. Well, those profits are on the back of the working class. In other words, it's another form of exploitation. They're making gross profits instead of saying, well, actually, how about this year we break even, keep prices down? Again, it just comes down to more and more profits, and they're not reinvesting them in environmentally or sustainable energy alternatives. It's just, again, going to shareholders. So I think all of that contributes to the so-called cost of living, and the cost of government, basically, is the lack of regulation, lack of protection. I mean, I'm sure your listeners will have really welcomed that 5p reduction on fuel, which is since
been wiped out by it's gone up. But you see, why now in 2022? Because it's always gradually crept up. Because I remember at the end of 2009 and 10, it kind of crossed into the pound per whatever it was at the time. What was it, pound per gallon or something, isn't it? And now it's sort of, it's going up so fast. I think it might have been, sort of 140 something around 2021, and now it's going up so fast. It's, it's threatening to hit the £2, isn't it? But why in 2022? They've always wanted to make profit and so on. So what you're saying is that these costs aren't something that they have to pass on. They're just taking the opportunity of the crisis and just keeping it artificially high.
Well, yeah, again, it comes to, you can compare what's going on across Europe with what's going on in the UK. Now, Brexit has had a huge impact on supply chains, where import tariffs, paperwork, delays, backlogs have meant that whilst there is a cost of living issue due to fuel, primarily disruptions because of COVID, and then the war in Ukraine, disrupting the export of grain from Ukraine, has pushed up prices. It's interesting that Brexit caused this disruption to the supply chains, and then you've then got this compound issue of petrol and oil costs. In Europe, the response has been to give. So again, let's have a look at France. People, I think, earning less than €30,000 received €100 just towards fuel, and there has been 25 cent reductions in the price of fuel. So that's made quite a big difference. Petrol prices in the UK, certainly at services, sort of like £2.10. In France, €1.74 or €1.71, dependent upon where you shop. Now, it's still an increase. So why the difference? Well, again, it comes down to government intervention and placing solid caps on the prices of foodstuffs. In France, they've capped the cost of a baguette to €1. Now, lots of interesting reasons for that. In Britain, on the other hand, a loaf of bread that I usually get from Tesco it's about November time, it was exactly £1, and it's now £1.70. Now that's a 70% increase. So 70%, if you go shopping at somewhere like Waitrose and you're already paying £3 for a loaf of bread and it's gone up to £3.20, something like that, you're not going to feel the pinch. Whereas those who have less, reduced means are seeing 70%. So again, cost of living also, you have to bear in mind inflation, and we talk about inflation, it's at 8%. Yeah, well, the effective rate of inflation, the poorer you are, is larger, and it's not sustainable. It's not I don't think cost of living crisis is, in my view, leading up to riots. If you can't feed yourself, then people will hit the streets.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because in France, it had said that that people actually respond to things like fuel rises and by actually getting on the streets and so on, and it's been and the energy costs have been limited to 4% instead of these massive 54%. It doesn't really happen to the same level in the UK. So I did notice there were a few cost of living protests, here and there, but it's just not, in terms of blockades of say, trucks and stopping the motorway. That's the sort of actions that have taken place in France over fuel price rises.
Yeah, and you find that the key difference is across Europe, you tend to find that people will protest sometimes violently, more frequently against their governments. I mean, in essence, what that means is politicians are more frightened of the people, whereas in Britain, people are terrified that Priti Patel might deport you or something like this. The reality of the situation is Britain is an increasingly placid place that doesn't really have a tradition of standing up against the government or demanding. It tends to be a view that in Britain politics is something you do every 5 years as opposed to something that you should be participating in every day. And it's not about political parties, it's about the prices of sausages on plates, it's the price of fuel. That's politics for you. But yeah, again, I just wonder why it is. What is it about, countries around the world where you've got major demonstrations, even in the United States, where a lot of companies are now beginning to find that workers are unionizing again, and people are demanding, better access to rights and trying to hold their governments in account. Whereas in Britain, it's probably more to do with the fact that when people do protest, there's a protest coming up on the 18th in London. It won't be reported by the media. It will, or if it is, it'll be sort of greedy trade unions or something like that. It'd be a negative spin. But it's getting to a point where we're cost of living. I mean, it's we're coming to a suffering crisis. I mean, we've got people who can't afford to heat at their own homes. Who are we've heard going around on buses to keep warm. Using pension passes. We've got all of this, and this isn't Britain of 2022 that I thought when I was growing up. This is what I would see. Now, this is the stuff of Dickens and the Victorian era, come large. Without much action outside of the union movement from the population, and I really do wonder why.
In its modern form, yes. So you said that really that the supplies of fuel aren't the actual reasons for the increases. So what about the supplies of the energy? They're kind of trying to put it as if it's all about we need to put these prices up. It's just like a crisis. We have to pass it on to you because it's actually gone up. Is that actually true that it does cost these private companies more to provide the energy to get these supplies of the of what it is that takes to generate electricity and the gas supplies, or is that just simply, can that be explained as massive profiteering as well?
Well, I think you've got two things. Um, Number one, the price of gas has decreased. The crude oil has increased, and that is in part due to supply chain disruption for Britain because of Brexit, but supply chain disruption also because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, just because prices have increased, I have a slightly different take on this. BP made 4 billion, I think it was just over 4 billion in the first 3 months of this year. That's just profit. So that profit is excess money generated on charging people extra at the forecourt. And it's not just BP, Shell. So even though the unit price may have increased, the cost at the forecourt has increased above that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so much profit for them. And that's just in 3 months. I don't think we can quite come to grip just how much £4 billion pounds is, but that's the figure. And yes, if other companies are making profits on the back of that, then my suggestion is prices have gone up larger, higher, and quicker than the wholesale price of extraction.
So they're very slow to pass on any, where the supply chain may have, actually, the fuel supplies may have come back up again. Some people are saying, they're taking forever to actually pass it back on to lowering the prices again. And then the other thing is, and there's an idea, it's just an idea really, that because we're in this climate change crisis, especially with what the IPCC revealed in 2021, is this actually a sort of backdoor method with these high energy prices of actually simply getting everybody's usage down, kind of, just by rising the prices? I mean, it's not kind of, they haven't done it in this way in France, as you've said, but is it a sort of, do you think it could be linked to the environment?
I think that when it comes to the environment, we're really not doing too much very quickly on it. We've been stunted in Britain. I don't think people are going to have any other choice than to try and be more sustainable, whether it's through alternative energy sources, solar paneling, wind, whatever it is. But to the average person, there was having a discussion earlier on with some trade unionists, actually on a course that I'm currently teaching. And there was comments about, oh, well, you've got Tesla cars and you've got all of this. Well, here's the problem for the average worker, or if you're unemployed or whatever, the idea of affording a Tesla is a wild dream. They're too expensive.
Or just any electric car as well. Just they cost thousands. There isn't much. They're too new at the moment to get much of a second-hand market, because it's always on low income. It's always about second-hand cars from 10, 15 years ago. So the electric cars haven't broken through on that yet, and yet that's what they want everyone to be driving by 2030.
Yeah, which I think is laughable. What you've got in the sort of EU and European countries, and in fact, I think New Zealand too, and other examples, are major grants given by construction, for construction of solar panels on roofs, to replace boilers for insulation and things like that. So that approach has meant people are taking up grants. In other words, they don't have to pay for it, and it goes to the construction sector, for house modifications, and is keeping that sector vibrant. In Britain, there isn't a response. Brown initiated a lot of grants for, again, solar panelling in his last year or two in office, and then that was killed by Cameron and his government. But again, right now there aren't any accessible grants for people who, right at this moment in time, could probably do with some solar paneling, on a house to completely reduce or at least remove the cost of energy.
That's what those protests were about, though. Of the what was it called? It was a successor to Extinction Rebellion. It was another protest that started to happen towards the end of 21 and 22, and people were blocking the M25, and that's all about insulate Britain. That's what they wanted. But
again, look at the response to that. The insulate Britain were met with trying to raise issues about climate change, the cost of the environment, etc., were met with arrests and denunciations in the press. I mean, I just have the very simple notion. We've got two options. We can carry on as we are, and if we wonder why it is that we all end up dying a very slow and painful death as the planet chokes us and starves us, then we continue as we are, or we change. But at the minute, in the middle of a crisis of living, you would have thought that a responsible government would be offering as many ways as possible to reduce the burden of energy as well as being sustainable.
Not just forcing the prices down up so that which, I mean, it's kind of a conspiracy theory. Could that be linked as almost a secret way of getting everyone's usage down, and that's what it's all about, really? I know it just seems such a logical idea, but there's no direct proof of that.
It might do, however, the idea that governments, I think that you give governments a little bit too much credence. The idea that governments are competent is laughable, because by and large they're not. So, do I think it's a conspiracy? It could be an idea, maybe, but I don't think governments are competent enough to come up with such an ingenious plot.
But what they are doing for real, I've seen in 2022, most of the news headlines moved away from COVID finally and to, Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, some people have actually said this has actually had not that much to do with the rise in petrol at all, and energy prices. So do you go along with that it actually isn't much to do with the situation in Ukraine?
For Britain, it is. I mean, Germany, for example, is dependent quite heavily on oil, gas and what have you from Russia. That's due to historic links for when the eastern part of that country was within the Soviet Union. There are dependencies in Hungary, for example, and Europe is slightly more dependent upon Russia for its energy. There are some exceptions, obviously. France generates most of its power from nuclear, and the rest really renewable. And as I say, in Britain, we still extract most of our oil. I think something like 4% of it comes from Russia. We've got North Sea extraction, although that's diminishing, and imports from elsewhere. So, yes, you could make the argument that Russia and the invasion of Ukraine hasn't had a direct impact on Britain because, the embargoes aren't really affecting us because we don't and didn't import as much from Russia. However, that would be an insular. I mean, just seeing now that the Northern Ireland protocols are about to be scrapped, it's going to cause a trade war with the EU. The problem is if there's lack of supply, or there's problems with supply, although we don't import things from as much from Russia directly or didn't, hence the reason the embargoes don't really have that much of an effect just from Britain. In Europe, and where there is a requirement for, Europe has embargoed mostly anyway, or is increasing its embargo of oil from Russia. That means that oil has to come from somewhere else, and they're the places that we get our oil from. And while there's trade wars and there's people competing for oil from other sources, that is also a key driver that pushes up the price. So to answer your question directly, if you just think of Britain, as an island that isn't that dependent, no, doesn't have that much impact by the embargo. However, when you then look at the bigger picture, which is lots of countries after the same resources that we're after, that pushes up the price
And that's what it
due
is.
to increased demand.
So it's not also that much Brexit to do with it, although it was looking like there's more protections for EU countries, as you were saying, in shielding their citizens from these massive increases. And do you actually attribute that we haven't had hardly any protection from it? In fact, Ofgem, they lifted the cap that they had so that the prices could go up by 54%. Is that kind of directly to do with Brexit, or would that situation have happened if we hadn't left the EU, or would it still possibly have happened?
The issue with Brexit is in the European Union, there is the sharing of resources. It's not about one country versus another. It's about sharing resources. So no country goes without, and there's unanimity. Eventually, anyway, of response to invaders like Russia, for example. In Britain, you've got to look at it from a larger picture. So, one, what protections do average workers have anymore? Well, farmers used to receive heavy subsidies from the EU. Counties, famously Cornwall, would receive subsidies from the EU. In other words, money had come back from our contributions to the budget. They're not there anymore. In Britain, the government hasn't met like for like. You've got the EU using its budget to assist its citizens, member states, with cost of living, cost of energy, and all of this, which we're not seeing in Britain. So, the impact of leaving the European Union has severed and angered, in fact, some of our closest trading partners who see us as untrustworthy. We're just about to breach international law as a country for the simple reason that rich Tory MPs who've got a lot of money to make out of crisis. A crisis will always make money for these folk. Peddling the line that since we've left the EU, everything's rosy, and that our economic issues are due to COVID or Ukraine. Nadine Dorris saying we're at war with Ukraine just the other day. What we've lost, in fact, is some additional protections for vulnerable sectors. Farms shutting in Britain because they're not profitable. We've got food wasting because it turns out telling everyone to leave the country isn't a good idea. Threats, why would anyone want to come to this country, under threat of being deported to an African country with serious human rights abuses? God help anyone who's LGBT being deported to Rwanda, or anyone else for that matter.
So this is really, in simple terms, you're saying yes, we probably wouldn't be paying these huge gas and electricity costs if we were still an EU member state. And
no, I mean we wouldn't have a Home Secretary operating a fascist, Hitler-esque, Madagascan. Read more on that if you want. Rwanda policy. If we were still within the EU, but look, these, when it came to the referendum, my thoughts are relatively clear. It was as 50-50. I'm not a huge fan of the EU. There are major flaws with it, although I did ultimately vote to remain. I think the campaign on both sides, people were lied to, frightened, or deliberately ill-educated, making their decisions, and they're my genuine thoughts. I just have the question of, where are these sunlit uplands?
Well, it doesn't. We're talking in 2022 about, and everything's been kind of, negative about these crises and things as it emerges out of this COVID pandemic. So yes, and that's why we're able to sort of still go back and look at, how much in this country does Brexit play a role in where we are today, obviously. Now you've got also, obviously, the Boris Johnson government. But just before we get to the attempts to remove Boris Johnson, the last one failed. what do you actually reckon to the response of the government in actually simply paying these lump sums to people on benefits that's going to happen, which is, I think the exact details might be a little bit unclear, but I think it's something like 2 lump sums leading to £650 towards cost of living costs for people on most means-tested benefits. So, do you think that's a positive response in relation to what's happening, in the likes of France, Germany, etc., or
no,
not really?
No, not at all. The average cost, this is just with a 54% increase. Bear in mind that cap is due to raise once again in just a few months' time. The cost of energy alone has gone up by on average around £900. So that won't cut it at all. And to assist with the cost of living, well, again, people talk about inflation on the news, at 8%. But again, I come back to it. If you have very limited means and you're going to the shop and everything that you purchase has gone up by, 20-30%, but on average, when you look at inflation, like take food, for example.
You gave the bread example. You said that was £1, and now a loaf's gone up to £1.70. That one is 70% for that.
Yeah, and for those, but then again, if you end up shopping at one of these posh sort of rich folk supermarkets, Waitrose comes to mind. Chances are, you can weather, a sort of £3.20 to £3.40 increase in a loaf. Well, that's not as high an increase in percentage on the upper end of the scale. And so when they average out inflation, they don't look at the actual inflation rates for those on modest means. So to give someone 650 quid, don't get me wrong, it's welcome, but there is so much more that we could be doing. We've got the government who, wanting to introduce another right to buy your own house, reducing council stuff. It's funny, really, that, at one point in time, Britain had a large number of allotments where people generally grew food and not much, but, a little bit. It's at times like this that you think, well, where are those allotments? Shouldn't there be more of them?
I do know one person who's got one. So at least, and it works quite well in providing quite a lot of vegetables and all the rest of it. But it's not what the average person does anymore. And it might remind you of what might have gone on in the 1940s. Still, a lot more than it does now.
Well, there's other things that we could do. I mean, I do ask this question frequently, which is why, when they're putting trees up in the middle of city centres, are they not productive? Excuse me. Excuse me. Why aren't they apple trees or pear trees? Why aren't they things that people could eat from if needed?
So it's like putting a little plaster over a gaping leg wound or some such analogy like that, presumably. These one-off payments, they're good to get one.
Well, I think that, unfortunately, giving £650, it's welcome, it's a one-off payment, as if it's sort of like, you've been treated. The real crisis here is greed. The genuine crisis that we're referring to is quite simply just greed. And there are lots of things that the government could do. I mean, for example, energy. You could nationalise the energy companies, and all of those payments to shareholders could be reinvested back into keeping prices down. British Gas made 45% profits last year, 44% profits, whatever. Energy went up by 54%.
It just makes you wonder why did they agree to do it then? I mean, I suppose it's not necessarily something you could answer, but why would Ofgem actually do that? Yeah.
Again, Ofgem, a lot of the regulators in the UK have little appetite for any teeth, because as soon as they act, and if it interrupts the Tory party will shut them down. Let's be real. I mean, other than Nadine Dorris's serial incompetence with not knowing how Channel 4's...
Oh yeah, she's trying to remove the public service licence of Channel 4, and also she's pretty keen on getting rid of the TV licence fee by 2027 for the BBC to not be a state broadcaster.
The only reason that the Tories want to do that is they'll soon be selling off the government. I mean, they're mostly bought anyway by private donors, as again Doris confirmed. But the real reason they're going for Channel 4 is because they've dared to criticise the government, and that's the only reason. We live in a quasi-democratic society. We actually live, I think, in a crony democracy. And you were mentioning Boris Johnson and the attempts to get rid of him. I can't see realistically that that Johnson will be removed.
Oh yes, that's what we're onto now. So it's a nepotocracy. It's a nepotocracy. That's a good word, like nepotism. Yes.
Well, we'd call it corrupt if it was in another country. I can see that he'll change the boundaries, constituency boundaries, to favour the Tories. I can see him flooding the Lords. In fact, while people were distracted, be it COVID and what have you, Johnson managed to get through the changes to the independent regulators for the Electoral Commission, lost its independence, and now boundaries can just be changed at the whim of the Prime Minister.
So to go on that idea, just to explain it, so you've got you've got constituency boundaries, which are kind of similar to local council areas, but they can be different, and they try to favour change them slightly to bring in a few more areas to bunch up Conservative support into one area, and say, well, couldn't we get rid of that estate there and bring in this area here or something, which is that's so. There's always been attempts to do that over the decades, actually. So they're just up to the same old tricks.
Well, yes, but I think that I can't see any way in which Boris Johnson will be removed. What he's got is a party that the cabinet are that incompetent they know they wouldn't have a job with anyone else, so they are obsessive. It's people keep calling Boris Johnson Boris as if he's something exceptional. I mean, did you ever say that of Gordon Brown, for example? Or did anyone call David Cameron just David? No, it's sort of, we've got this cult of Boris Johnson.
Yeah, it's like a personality cult. I nearly said to cut that word out. Yes, in a way, yeah. Because
you were thinking of Jeremy Hunt then.
Now, what we have seen, though, and this is our last topic now, we have gone over half an hour, but this is our last thing now. We have seen him, it's been revealed that he's broke so many rules and procedures, and lying about it has just become sort of de facto normal now. Like, it's an attempt to get out of it, and it's not... Nobody ever seems to have to resign or give up their position in government. And they used to have to do that. Scandal used to mean something to be scared of. So it kind of seems like... and then you've had this thing, and I haven't followed it too closely, about how they broke all the restrictions on socialising during the lockdown and still had loads of parties with ministers, and it was called Partygate, and none of that's enough to remove him as Prime Minister. He didn't follow the rules that they were trying to put on the rest of the population. So it just seems that nothing would remove Boris Johnson, but obviously there's an attempt to do so by and the elements of the Tory party that actually are unsatisfied with him, and that's something like 40%, roughly of the other MPs, I presume, or membership.
Well, yeah, people who are junior ministers and on top of their MP salary get a bung from the government for their junior ministries. They won't vote to resign, which they would have to. A handful would. The reality of the situation is the Tories just want to think of themselves and change their leader. What they're not thinking about is the irreparable damage that's been done to this country. If they were serious, what they would do is vote to bring down the government. But they won't do that because of self-interest. So you can, all of this high rhetoric about Johnson and, how reprehensible he is, well, bring him down then. But they won't. So, there won't be a no confidence measure. It seems it only comes to thinking about the country when they might have a shot of becoming the next PM, unfortunately. I can't see a method in which Boris Johnson leaves office. I can see him changing rules and all of this, and here's finally people are seeing the real problem. I think, or I'd like to think, it turns out if you don't have a written constitution and everything's based upon tradition, there are no rules. And he is like Trump, ready to break them all.
What's interesting is, and then, if he had lost the no confidence vote by just enough, he would have had to have gone, and that would have dissolved the government. But it's created this precedent now for any future governments, which I guess is dangerous to this democracy that we supposedly have, which is that future governments can break any rules they want and do just what they want once they're in power. That's it, because there used to be standards, but now these have now all been broken during this 2019 Parliament. So it seems like that's it now in terms of that. No matter what scandal there is surrounding Boris Johnson's government, that's it. They just carry on.
Well, I put it this way: the Tories used to be, I think they call themselves One Nation Conservatives. Realistically, for example, you've got this ditching the EU protocols in the Northern Ireland Protocol and the EU withdrawal arrangements, and Britain's just going to scrap international law that it signed up for. There'd be previous prime ministers spinning in their graves at this thought, but it doesn't matter. We're not a law-abiding democracy anymore. I mean, imagine refugees facing torture, perhaps even from Afghanistan and places like that, to find that, Britain that welcomed so many refugees at one stage has become such a nasty. No, actually, I think England, if I'm being quite blunt, has become a nasty, insular, horrid, inward-looking, xenophobic, racist culture, propped up by the likes of the Daily Mail and other such rags. Not everyone, obviously, but generally that's the issue.
And there's been a bit of a rise in right-wing media as well, slightly as well, because you've got the launch of these new channels as well. Talk TV, which is related to Talk Radio, is funded by Rupert Murdoch's, I think it's News International, and it's now broken away from Sky TV, by the way. So for anyone who still thinks that is to do with Rupert Murdoch, it now isn't. It's Comcast, NBC, Universal, and GB News and such like. So obviously, you must obviously think that this is all part of that climate.
It is. It's peddling fear. Fear is quite a useful emotion if you're trying to force people into one way, because firstly, you make people frightened, and pay cuts, low pay, removal of sick rights, sick pay leave, removal of holidays, 0 hours contracts, keep people poor and ready to doff their cap to their new masters in business. And if they're frightened, then helpfully, the Daily Hail, who supported the Nazis and black shirts, I should say, in the run-up to World War II, then come and explain that the reason that you're frightened is because of all of these foreigners. And it's such rubbish. Loose stool water is probably what I would call it. It's such nonsense. But there we go. So yes, England, I can't see for too much longer that Northern Ireland is going to remain part of the UK. I can't see that too much longer Scotland is, Wales is, and to be blunt, ultimately, I think even England will separate, and this is what we're watching. You can't have a country that used to be a very welcoming society now deport people to Africa to a country with abhorrent human rights abuses, where the government's own website, if people who are wanting to travel there voluntarily, advises not to go because there's sporadic violence, etc. And that's the place that we're sending people. What sort of a society do we live in?
Well, it's coming after that Windrush scandal, obviously.
Well, how long is it before it's no longer just immigrants? How about, if you commit a crime, are we going to start deporting people? I mean, we used to do it to Australia, and before that, the American colonies. But will that be the case? We just remove people from the country. It beggars belief, and I don't know. People who should be fighting for rights, and people who should be on the streets, and should be defending our terms and conditions, and supporting the trade unions, are, I don't know, nowhere to be seen. So my message to everyone is join a union and fight back, because you've got a manufactured cost of living crisis. People are laughing to the banks, and it's not us. You've got lots of solutions available from a government who, when you've got a question, who's the poorest in the cabinet? What you're asking is anyone in the cabinet not a millionaire?
I suppose that's well. A lot of them are also, other power inequalities are. A lot of them are private landlords, for example. So to go along with that,
what do they know of the lives of ordinary people? And I should also, for balance, say that the Labour Party's gone back to its nasty ways under Miliband and what have you, with the we support deporting, we support all of that. And we're also not going to improve benefits or nationalise anything. It's like, well, you're meant to be the party of Labour.
So does that mean you would? I haven't actually thought this year much about Keir Starmer's been so much in the background. You obviously think that the opposition's response to the cost of living crisis is wholly inadequate then?
I don't really think there is much of an opposition. In fact, I see more. I'm surprised myself saying this. I despise nationalism, however it presents itself. But I think the major opposition in the UK is the SNP.
The more socialist, progressive sort of ideas, so that and that actually happens in Wales as well under Mark Drakeford. So we could just finish on this one then. We brought that up before, and we should have included. We have gone over half an hour by quite a bit, and that is the attack on questioning broadcasters who are depend on the government support to exist. So you got Channel 4. It's publicly owned and has been since its inception in 1982. And the act to start it might have come from the Callaghan government, but I think it did launch under Margaret Thatcher in 1982 to be an alternative questioning sort of broadcaster that has no funding from the BBC licence fee. It's self-funding via revenue raising from its programmes and commissions and advertising it shows, and there's no real compelling reason to change that for Channel 4 to just make it yet another private broadcast company, of which there are numerous ones that have to make programming that is commercially successful only. It's probably because of Channel 4 News and it's holding the government to account, and then you've got the BBC and this situation where the license fee seems to be slipping away because so many people are now using on-demand services and questioning why they have to pay for that broadcaster just to access the television. So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen? Is Channel 4 going to end up being sold off, and is the BBC going to lose that license fee funding?
Yes, I think it will. I think the long-term goal of the Tories has been to get rid of the NHS, the BBC, Channel 4, and all of those three will be things of the past. You'd like to think that a Labour Party come back and restore it. It won't, because it's been taken over by people who are basically Tories. So I think in terms of independent journalism, there's a few things. State funding should be available for broadcasters. There should be more than one public broadcaster, I think, and Channel 4 certainly does its role. You think about some of the films that have come out of Film 4, Train Spotting, other such things. They've done a very good job in my view, and it requires that they're supported publicly. Not that they receive money or anything like that, but you hear what I'm saying. But I think in terms of the media, when you've got 6 families, all right wing, all running the UK media, that needs to be broken up. It massively does. Perhaps one of the rules, that Clinton got rid of in the United States that was superb was for balanced reporting. If you run a right-wing piece, then you must do the opposite. I think if we were to have something like that in the UK, we'd end up with a balanced, we wouldn't. We'd end up with a more balanced media than what we've got at the minute, which is just the same news story, slightly differently worded.
So it's online versus, some of the big broadcasters on TV. So these media families, I presume that, you're talking about papers then is still, rather than just, the owners of ITV and Channel 5. Channel 5's owned by a US corporation now, so it was, Viacom. Mm-hmm. So that, it could be something like that Channel 4 gets purchased and it will just become a channel that you can't tell the difference between that and Channel 5. In fact, Nadine Dorries couldn't, because she said, Channel 5 was privatised, and look how that's gone. It was never privatised. It was launched. It had the license for the 5th terrestrial channel, and it was always a private company. So she's in charge of doing this to Channel 4 in her role, and she doesn't actually know what the difference between Channel 4 and 5 actually is.
Clearly, the testicles she was eating in the jungle have had a major effect on her ability to think. Yes, print media. It's not just the print media. You've got things like the state broadcaster who does newspaper reviews, but conveniently, and I'm not necessarily a big fan of the paper, but why isn't the Morning Star in the paper reviews? Why is it the Daily Star?
So they do cover the right-wing ones. They'll actually show articles from The Sun, and the Daily Mail in that, won't they? They'll show the Guardian, but as you say, they don't go to the They don't go to
the Guardian's not really a left-wing paper, is it? So
again, it's kind of comparison to New Labour, therefore, with the Guardian, isn't it? As I said, they don't go to the Morning Star and they don't go to, but they will go to the Sun. So
Well, this is it. So the idea of a balanced media is, problematic, and of course, people get fed up of listening to the same stories on the same broadcasters or different broadcasters, same story, slightly differently worded, and so they go to social media and find that there's a larger mix of stories, but can be a bit more of an open sewer in terms of some of the extremes. So.
Then we've got the TV license of the BBC, so we're just coming up to. We'll kind of cap it by just coming up in a couple of minutes. We'll cap it. We'll have reached an hour at that point. And just, do you actually think? I mean, there is an element. Everyone is forced to pay for that just to access TV and radio. Well, TV that is broadcast over the air, even to watch other channels that are on the air, you have to pay this one organisation. So even though it's obviously coming from the Conservative view of why they might want to get rid of the BBC in the current form. There are people who are criminalised because they've been caught out not paying the licence. They're on low income. So what do you actually think? Is that an area that you would support reform on anyway, or would you actually try to safeguard the BBC in its current funding?
I think the problem I have is I have such a dislike of BBC News and Question Time. And the reality of that is because the Conservative Party run it.
Oh yes, there's a lot more posts within the BBC. I'm just starting to cut across there. It's just to put this point in, which is actually there are a lot of over the 2010s. They have got a lot of people from the party who have ended up with jobs within the BBC. So I guess this is going to be reflected in some of the output that we see. So yeah,
well, it is. So you don't find trade unionists invited onto Question Time that often, or if they do, it'll be some very weak centrist General Secretary. You don't have a diaspora. We know that in Question Time there's Tory councillors frequently. And BBC News has just become a mouthpiece for the Conservative Party. This said, though, there are other things that the BBC does other than news, which I do feel
they do,
precious about. David Attenborough's his programming is wonderful. There's documentaries, films, there's
comedy.
People still enjoy radio,
music.
You've got Radio 4, Just a Minute and things like that. People enjoy the music. So the idea that all of that goes, and the World Service is, invaluable around the world. People learn how to speak English and, in corrupt regimes that aren't Britain, around the world, they listen in for a bit of a glimpse of what's actually going on. So this idea that there shouldn't be public funding. I mean, you could change the format of funding for the BBC into a tiered rate dependent upon income. You could do lots of other things. I do think the BBC is worth saving, but equally I think that why should I pay my TV license when, if I want to listen to the news, all I get is the Conservative Party, Laura Quensberg, and a load of other card-carrying Tories telling me their view.
Do they not?
The only left-leaning person, Victoria Derbyshire, gets hounded all the time.
Well, there's a lot of people saying that she's not particularly on, on that side.
No,
so
I don't think so either. But either way, it's meant to be balanced, and it's not.
Yeah. So, they haven't proposed alternative ways it could be funded. It's kind of put it back to the BBC. You find a way it could be funded without the TV license. They've not not even proposed many other ways themselves. So, well, thanks for talking about all these issues in 2022. As you know, although things have seemed quite bleak, it's quite interesting to see the way that it is going. And you've been speaking in the Unite building in Birmingham in the West Midlands, and no one's come into the room actually to get you out of it. So thanks to them as well for not ending the interview.
They did actually, but they're just hovering outside. So
oh well, now they can hover inside after this. So yeah, thanks very much for appearing on the 107 stream, James Martin from Unite. That was the insights of Jay Martin on our world, society and politics. The Jay Martin interview, recorded at the Ashford studio in Leicestershire.